It's Patrick Hutzel from intensivecareathome.com.au, where we provide tailor-made solutions for long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomy by improving their quality of life, and where we also provide tailor-made solutions to hospitals and intensive care units to save money and resources whilst we're providing quality care. In last week's blog I talked about the 5 reasons why intensive care at home is not disrupting intensive care. You can check out last week's blog by clicking on the link below this video. In this week's blog I want to talk about, can you learn to look after someone at home with a tracheostomy and ventilator? Now, there aren't many long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies in the community in Australia, given that it's currently such an under-resourced and underdeveloped area. Most long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies stay in intensive care for far too long and unnecessarily. Therefore, funding is being misallocated and is being used for expensive and unnecessary intensive care treatment that could be provided in a far more patient, family and holistic care environment in the community. The few long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies that end up in the community do so after many months in intensive care or on a respiratory ward, only to find that nobody can look after them at home, and the burden of looking after them is more often than not left with their families or with non-qualified and non-skilled carers. This increases the burden for all parties involved. Patients often end up going back to intensive care quite frequently because, number 1, nobody is accountable to keep them out of intensive care. Number 2, nobody has the skills and knowledge to keep them out of ICU. Number 3, the lack of quality control. Some carer agencies provide staff that are not qualified to look after ventilated patients with tracheostomies in the home and are not qualified to do so. Number 4, the lack of strong advocacy for long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies. Again, their stay in intensive care is unnecessarily prolonged, and hospitals and the health system are wasting hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of taxpayers' money every month, rather than looking at a more cost-effective and patient and family-friendly alternative. It's therefore that only accredited and qualified services such as intensive care at home that work with skilled and qualified registered nurses who have ICU experience can make a real difference in the quality of life for long-term ventilated adults and children and their families. Only the right skill set, and more importantly, the right mindset, can get long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies out of intensive care a lot quicker and provide them with the quality of life they really need and deserve. There are no cheap solutions in order to get long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomy being discharged from intensive care into the community, but there are more cost-effective solutions to provide home care for long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies compared to the compulsory $5,000 per day intensive care bed. What are your thoughts? Do you think that keeping long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies in intensive care for longer than necessary is the right thing to do? Leave your comments on the blog. Please note that intensive care at home has been selected as a preferred provider for Queensland Health. We're also currently hiring enthusiastic and experienced intensive care nurses with critical care certificate for a ventilated Melbourne client close to the CBD. For more information, check out our career section. You can also contact me if you want to know more about how we can help you, your intensive care units and your patients and your families. Thank you for tuning into this week's blog. This is Patrick Hutzel from intensivecareathome.com.au, and I'll see you again next week in another update.